Well, this is part two of the inverter. One thing I wanted to mention is the best thing you can do is have a 3-ring binder to put your information in, whether it's manual or parts, data sheets. There is a procedure for removing the MOSFETs, but we'll get into that later. So you can get these for about $1 at the dollar store, which is about the only thing you can buy for $1 at the dollar store. And it's a good way to keep track of stuff. The other thing I wanted to mention was the fuses that come with this inverter. Yeah, you can't really read the value on it, but these are 40 amps. Now the interesting thing is I ordered this for 24 volts, and they configure them with, I think, if it's not 12 volts, I guess they reconfigure them. And in the manual, it'll state that which fuse value for which voltage, input voltage of the inverter. So these 40 amps is for the 12 volt version. So if you stick this in for the 24, it's supposed to, I want to say it's 20 amps without looking it up. So if you were to just stick this fuse in to this 24 volt inverter, you'd blow it up. So they made an honest mistake. They didn't change the value of the fuses when they converted it to 24 volts. It'll be interesting to see which fuses are inside there. If they're 40 amp, that's really bad because there's nothing basically protecting it. So make sure you have the right fuses. I would even look inside the machine inverter and also make sure what your spare fuses are. They're just typical spade fuses, or well, that's what I call them, automotive fuses, so easy to get. So on scope grounds, the ground wire, back in the day when I used to use a Textronics great big old scope, you plugged into the wall, and you had to be careful about grounding because let's say this scope was plugged into the AC outlet, and this device you're looking at was plugged into the AC outlet. If you connect the ground of your scope probe to something other than ground, you would fry your lead or cause damage to your probe or your scope or the device you're looking at. So it was always important to make sure that this didn't have any potential when you were hooking that up to, which still applies today, except this scope, which is an entry model, affordable entry model scope, which does amazing stuff. I'm just running it. It's powered by USB supply, and I'm just running it off a battery, so it's totally isolated. So that alleviates some of the problem. However, since this is has two scope probes, if you were to connect both scope probe grounds to a point, they both have to be at the same potential. Otherwise, you would short out your scope and cause damage to either whatever you're hooking it to or the scope. I just have some wires stuck in here so we can hook the probes on. I just used solder, so in case I do mess something up, it's a little bit like a fuse, some thin solder. So we're looking, our ground is ground, and we're looking at, which would be our black wire in America. And then we can hook up on the white wire which usually is, also ground or neutral. And we have two sine waves. And I originally thought it would be, one would be a pulse up and the other would be the pulse down. And I was a little confused at first, but then I got to thinking about it. And what we're looking at is split phase. And kind of makes sense now if we adjust these. When you have that type of waveform where you have one sine wave going up and the other one going down, you end up creating your normal sine wave that you would see, a one sine wave. So split phase, what is split phase? Now this was what I'm kind of assuming it is. I could be wrong. But split phase is, best way to describe it is in America, the power companies deliver electric on three phases. And they try to distribute the three phases equally throughout, let's say, the neighborhood. So you end up getting a phase coming close to your house, and that one phase goes into a transformer. And what comes out of the transformer is split phase. You don't, just because you have 220 in a house, that's not really two phase, that's split phase. So you have 120 on one side and 120 on the other. And they're, like these signals, they're 180 degrees out of phase. Although it's not 220, it's not 120 and 120, it's like, RMS. Well, peak to peak is 180 roughly, and RMS is 64 volts. But if it was just peak, it'd be half of 180. So you're kind of going from this peak to the other bottom peak, and you get a higher voltage. What I think they do that for is if they want to have 220, I would think you could configure this to have 220s where you'd have hots on both the black wire and the white wire, or in this case the red wire and the black wire, if you want to look at their goofy color coding. And I might explain why this color coding is kind of strange. So now, and it does have a nice 62 hertz frequency. It seems to be pretty stable there. Of course, I'm not really loading it heavily. My other frequency is kind of off because of triggering. This isn't an expensive scope, and I can get both frequencies to come out right, but then it screws up the voltage, and I think that's in our triggering of the scope on the second channel. So let's take the ground off, and since this oscilloscope is totally isolated because it's battery powered, we can connect the ground to this hot leg, which the white wire, which normally isn't hot, but in this case it is. And we can look at our output, the black wire. And we have to adjust this a little bit. Put it about in the center, about like that. And, well, we get a peak to peak about 357 volts, which is about right, like 340 peak to peak is a normal household. Any RMS, which you'd kind of read with a voltmeter, or would read with it, is 125 volts. Of course, the inverter says 122. That's pretty close. This, the scope isn't super accurate, but it's not too bad. And we get a fairly decent sine wave. Let's just hit auto. And we'll save that waveform. Save picture, I guess. Oh, now I screwed it all up. Let's shut off channel 2 and hit auto again. There we go. Pretty decent looking sine wave. And let's just save picture. And I don't know if we could hook up. No, we can't. Let's see, it's turned on. All right, so let's go back and save this waveform. So we can hit auto. We can save it on the forum and save picture. Yeah. Well, that should be about it for this video. And I'll talk to you all later.